Jim, welcome to Cornell Tech. Actually, have you been here on the campus before?
I have, with you.
Oh, yeah.
A few times.
This cold is affecting me more than I thought. Well, welcome back. I'm always surprised. How many actually in the audience have been to Cornell Tech before? Oh, good number. Okay, usually, used to be that it was about 10% of the audience had been to Roosevelt Island and not been here before. So it's nice to see people coming back and using the campus. It's, of course, beautiful this time of the year. But, okay, you've been here before, but you are now in...
It's been a few years, in fairness.
It's been a few years. Okay, fair enough. Okay, so I'm not hallucinating. Maybe I'm an LLM and I'm hallucinating. I don't know. But let's set the stage a little bit and tell people about your background. You're originally from upstate New York.
Correct. Grew up in Buffalo, New York.
Excellent. Okay, just like our governor.
Yeah, grew up in upstate New York, outside of Buffalo, Williamsville, New York, to be specific, if anyone in the audience is from there.
Yeah. Got a couple there.
Came to Cornell for electrical engineering.
When was that?
I graduated in '91.
Yep.
But I was attracted to Cornell. I couldn't make up my mind in high school between engineering and pre-med. So I ended up applying to a whole bunch of liberal arts schools for the pre-med and a bunch of more engineering schools for engineering. And Cornell was the one school that offered both that I could do at the same time. So
and did you stick
I enrolled in Cornell. I did. I finished all the requirements for pre-med along with my double E degree in 4 years. And I think I broke my dad's heart when I called him junior year and told him I wasn't taking the MCATs, that I liked the engineering better. But it worked out okay.
Good for you. Yeah, I was going to say it worked out pretty well. There are probably only a handful of people that have done pre-med and double E.
I have no idea. I don't recommend it.
Yeah. I mean, we were talking about this earlier, that the engineering curriculum at Cornell is particularly rigorous, and so that's part of the reason it's such a challenge to do that. So is pre-med, so doing that combination is pretty impressive.
Just laying in free electives like organic chemistry, bio, genetics.
The mix, yeah. Well, it's complementary in a way, too. You ever thought about going back to be a doctor now?
No.
Okay, good. Well, it's funny, I was looking at your LinkedIn profile. One of the jobs you list is caddy in your experience. Would you have described yourself as a computer geek in your formative professional years? And did you learn how to code at Cornell, or was that something you came in with?
It's more complicated than that. So yes, I was a caddy for 6 years. It paid well, and I only had to work half the day, which was fantastic. And it gave me a lot of free time to tinker with computers. And this is back in the days of the Apple IIe, and I did do some programming, and I subscribed to all the magazines that had things like shape tables in them and how to make basic graphic games and things like that. So I did do some programming. I would say I was not a very good programmer. I didn't take any high school programming classes. I was largely self-taught until I came to Cornell. And then at Cornell, I took all the standard intro-level CS classes, but I didn't take too much more than that because I was a double E major and a pre-med major. So there wasn't actually a lot of room for more of the traditional CS classes like algorithms and operating systems and things like that. Right. However, the engineering program at that time, I don't know if this is still the case, you had to know how to program to get through a number of the classes. So like C programming, I became fairly proficient at C programming through other classes at Cornell, but not because I was taught to program in C.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize a lot of the outside the classroom is where you pick up as much stuff as inside the classroom.
Yeah, my son's a junior at Cornell now, and I just sent him a copy of Kernighan and Ritchie. I'm like, any CS major should have a copy of that.
Yeah, Brian, by the way, is a lecturer at Princeton, and he's fantastic as a lecturer and still teaches. He's great. Of course, one of the inventors of Unix and C and so forth at Bell Labs. Every computer scientist should have a copy of Kernighan and Ritchie. So, okay, after Cornell, after you graduated, you went to EDS, Electronic Data Systems, which most students probably have never heard of EDS these days.
Yeah, so EDS was, depending on what generation you are, it was the company founded by Ross Perot when he left IBM to start a it was really sort of the first business that did outsourcing. They came in and they bought the IT departments of large companies and tried to make them more efficient, scale processes, build unified data centers, things like that. I worked there for about 5 years. I was in a fairly unglamorous role working inside General Motors factories, working on their broadband networking infrastructure. So EDS, the nickname was Everyone Dresses the Same. We had to wear navy blue suits. And here we were working on the floors of the factories, stringing broadband Ethernet, fiber optic cabling, things like that. It was in the era when the factories were very first connecting their machines, their time card systems, et cetera. So yes, that was what I did for about 3.5 years. And then EDS actually had a pretty robust training program. It was a 3-year training program. And I was sent to their engineering systems engineering school. I feel like the Department of Redundancy department in that. But it was in Flint, Michigan, or in Southfield, Michigan, sorry. And I did some work in Flint. But went to Southfield, Michigan, and it was a 10-week program. It was a pretty intense programming class. And there were a lot of people in it that had never programmed before. So some of us had it easier than others. And at the end of that class, I was asked to stay. There were some complications with one of the teachers and a difficult pregnancy. And they asked me to stay and teach the next class after that. So I did that. And because I helped them out with that, they let me choose where I wanted to go next. So I moved to Seattle. And that was very different with EDS. I was actually in their Unigraphics division, and I spent about 2.5 years writing CAD software.
Cool.
So we had a whole bunch of PhD physicists writing algorithms, and we were implementing them in C, C++, in the Unix world. So 3D solids modelers for a few years.
That's a pretty amazing transition, both physically, so you picked up and moved East Coast to West Coast.
Yep.
And did you ever come back then, or was that the transition?
Not for work, but my family's all from Buffalo, New York, so I get back a fair amount to see family. Yep. But no, once I ended up in Seattle, I worked for Unigraphics for a few years, then I got on some other projects out there, learning 4GL languages like Oracle and database programming, SQL, things like that. Ended up in the Bay Area.
And then you ended up at Oracle itself, right?
I did. So EDS and Oracle are jointly staffing a project at Hewlett-Packard to rebuild their global pricing systems. And during that project, I was recruited away to Oracle. And at the same time, met my wife, who's in this room, who is another Cornellian. We met through mutual friends at a Zincs night. We did not know each other here, so it can happen, even after Cornell. And so we started dating long distance. I was in Seattle, still working for Oracle, but Oracle's headquarters were in the Bay Area. Susie was in the Bay Area, so it just sort of made sense to move
Two good reasons to move down.
2 good reasons to move to the Bay Area. So I moved to the Bay Area.
Wonderful.
And never left.
While you were at Oracle, you met Mark Benioff, I guess.
I did.
Yeah, so he was there as well.
He was there. So Mark Benioff was a fairly fast-rising young executive at Oracle. And Larry Ellison, the chairman and CEO at the time, had asked Mark to start, well, there were a number of projects he was working on, but one of them was a philanthropic project around America's Promise in conjunction with Colin Powell. And it was in the Leave No Child Behind with computing in those days. And they had the America's Promise Little Red Wagons. Well, Oracle started something called Oracle, I think there was the President's Summit for America's Future. And Larry Ellison sent Mark Benioff to the President's Summit for America's Future. He met Colin Powell. Oracle signed up as part of Oracle's Promise. And the idea with Oracle's Promise was, this is back in the days of network computers, which is a very short window. Larry Ellison decided to build these network computers for education. And I was the chief architect for Mark. I met him through the Oracle consulting. Mark asked me to come over, and we ended up deploying 5,000 network computers in 125 schools in the US, and then we did a couple schools overseas. in a relatively short period of time, including getting these schools online on the internet. We were drilling holes through cinder block walls in schools in Washington, D.C., and running cable. And so it tied back a little bit to my work at EDS and a little bit of work at Oracle.
Yeah, and I was gonna. So is that part of the genesis for the sort of ethos at Salesforce then, in terms of?
Well, the do-it-yourself ethos, yes. But Mark and I got to know each other well professionally and somewhat as friends at that point. And Mark had this idea for Salesforce that he had been talking about. And what I had been working on largely at Oracle was the scalability of very large databases. And very large database then was about 1/100th of the size of what you consider a very large database today, maybe even smaller. But that was, so we'd have these conversations about, is it possible to build enterprise software that mimics an Amazon.com or an eBay or something like that, where you could have a purpose-built, metadata-driven database that could power multiple customers sharing an infrastructure, keep it secure, keep it performant, be able to do all the sorts of upgrades, and as Mark used to like to put it, to democratize software and basically put the same tools that enterprise companies are using into the hands of smaller businesses. And we talked about this for probably a year and a half, and we'd skip out at lunch and we'd go talk to design partners, other friends of Mark, about the idea, and the idea became viable, or we thought it was viable in 1998, and he started looking for his original development team. He ended up acquiring a very small company called Left Coast Software, and that was his first 3 developers. And they started in March of 1999, and Mark and I left Oracle to join in July of 1999.
So you were right there at the very beginning for Salesforce.
The very beginning, yeah. Wow. Yeah, I'm not a founder, but I interviewed the founders for Mark. So.
Okay, that makes you one level up, I guess. Yeah, I don't know
where it puts me.
Well, did you realize at the time that you were creating this whole sector of SaaS? I mean, software as a service.
We did not. We didn't even know what to call ourselves. Software as a service hadn't been invented yet. There were companies out there called application service providers that were taking your Oracle ERP system and they would just pick it up and run it in a data center for you on a private network. That really wasn't what we were either, because we were building this from the ground up. And I forget who coined the term software as a service. I think Mark would tell you it's Michael Dell. I think Michael Dell would tell you he said it was cloud. He came up with the word cloud, not SaaS. A lot of vagary around this, but there were others trying to do it, but not in the same way that we were doing it. And I think that Mark is a leader, plus the technology path we chose and timing and luck and some other things all weighed into Salesforce becoming what it is today.
Yeah, it's huge now. You were telling me how many employees at Salesforce?
A little over 70,000.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, a little bit of growth too.
In 24 years. It'll be 25 years in March.
So, and you've been there the full 25 years, right?
Minus 3 months.
Yeah.
So. Never mind the weekends. I worked on it before I was actually an employee, but yeah.
Are the other founders still there, or?
2 of them are. One is very active, Parker Harris. He's our Chief Technology Officer. Mark, obviously, you would consider a founder. It was his idea. So even though he didn't technically start until 3 months later, he was working on it basically every day in his free time. Right. And then one other, our Chief Scientist is part-time there, and then one is completely retired.
That's pretty impressive. I mean, sticking, especially in the tech world in the Valley, I mean, sticking with a place for 25 years is unheard of these days. So what kept you connected to Salesforce for so long?
So the biggest connection is the people you work with. I really have enjoyed the people on our executive team, in our development organization, our product organization, our legal, every organization, we have some really strong leadership. And even though they've changed over time, the relationships you build are hard to walk away from. I think, when you look at our Chief Operating Officer, Brian Millham, he's only been there 3 months less than me. Started out as a direct salesperson on the phone, inside sales. And here is our COO, runs the largest organization inside the company. and 24 years later. And if you look at, we have this concept, Mark had a golden retriever that he always brought by the office. His dog's name was Koa. And we've named our 10-year employees Koa Club. And this is kind of amazing to me, but even though we're 70,000 employees, we have about 5,000 or 6,000 employees that are Koa Club members. But if you go back to the size of the company 10 years ago, it wasn't that big. We really accelerated starting around 2015, 2016. So the fact that we have that many employees from that era still there is kind of incredible. Yeah. And then I was looking at a list, and I think we're at maybe 100 double Koas like me. And of our first 20 employees, there's maybe a third of us. Wow. Which is, a testament to longevity.
There's something about the culture then of the place that
culture, maybe it's a cult, I don't know. But yeah.
Well, can you say a few words about what your current role is at Salesforce?
Yeah, so rewinding, this is probably better to start at the beginning. Yep. I was the original architect for the data center hosting operations. So I didn't write much code that became features or functions, but I wrote a lot of the code that operationally allowed us to run the service at scale: backup recovery, security management, identity management, the distributed computing that allowed us to have multiple zones for failover, things like that. And I ran the 24/7 operations of the service. I did that for about 7 years. Somewhere in the middle of that, when we were looking at becoming a public company, Mark asked me to take on internal IT also, and I became CIO for the company. And that was a whole new beast to me, dealing with Sarbanes-Oxley, Section 404, everything you need to do to become a public company. So I helped us file our S1, get through all of the original audits that we had to do to become a public company, and led IT then for 3 years after our IPO, in addition to building and running the service. After that, I took a summer off basically to reacquaint myself with my family, and came back and took on building security, risk, and enterprise risk management. So I was what we call our chief trust officer. So that was security, technology audit and compliance, enterprise risk management, business continuity planning, health and accessibility.
Just a few things.
Yeah, but they were all pretty nascent at the time. They were all new to us. So I built a bunch of organizations, and slowly, as I built them, I handed them off to more appropriate places for them to be in the company. And then about 10 years ago, I all through this, having worked for Mark for so many years, there's a pretty good trusted relationship between the two of us. So I had always been involved in the strategic planning for the company. So about 10 years ago, that became my complete focus. So now I have sort of 3 to 4 things I'd say I do for the company. One is I run our strategic planning operation. So we have strategic planning in products. We have strategic planning in finance. We have strategic planning in sales and marketing and how we do operational things like that. But pulling it all together into our annual strategic plan, making sure everybody's aligned behind it, understands what the obstacles and challenges and risks are to it. That's what my role is to bring all that together. We then also run a quarterly cadence of executive operational offsites where we measure ourselves against that annual strategic plan. And I run all those quarterly offsites. So 4 times a year, I'm extremely busy. Interestingly, one of those is next week. So coincide, a little weird being here right now, but it's all good.
Thank you.
I couldn't say no to this. So, so I run those quarterly offsites. 2 of them are in conjunction. So our January one is our corporate kickoff for the year, and our summer one in August is like a reset for the second half of the year. And we run a larger management meeting with, say, our SVP Plus community. And it's a considerably larger meeting. I'm also in charge of the agenda, speaker prep, things like that go with that. A few years ago, we recognized that, so the third role is this a few years ago, we recognized that we needed to standardize the way we do internal reporting of the measures that we use to run our business with the same rigor that we use for the external numbers that are coming out of audited financial systems. So while I have no role in our audited financial systems and don't want to ever again, I do have this thing called the Accountability Performance Matrix, which is 54 internal measures that we use to run Salesforce on 7 dimensions, all built in an analytics system with AI on top of it and graphing, charting, and visualization. That is how we manage how Salesforce is run. And that's actually what we review at these quarterly meetings with the executive leader who's responsible, the accountable leader, that's why it's Accountability Performance Matrix, talking about the cells that they own and why things are in the state that they are, good, bad, or ugly.
Wow.
So
it's fascinating, the differences between what you have to have at that kind of scale to be effective, and that sort of strategic planning and execution that.
Yeah, and you know, there's the phrase that runs around our office and probably other places, better, never best, or better, never best. And you know, it's always continuous improvement. We could still be better, we could still be more efficient, but we feel like we do a reasonable job.
Good.
So, and then the last thing I do is I spend a lot of time with customers. So.
Yeah, I remember you mentioning this to me at one time, that important customers, like keeping a finger on what their challenges are, what their issues are.
Yeah, we have this thing called the Salesforce Innovation Center. And the Salesforce Innovation Center actually exists in every one of our towers. So we have a tower in New York City at Bryant Park. We have one in San Francisco. We have one in Indianapolis, Tokyo, London, Sydney, Australia, et cetera. We built a Salesforce Innovation Center, which is a hub where we can bring our customers in and bring our experts in and immerse them in Salesforce and all that we do, our Customer 360, and spend time. They can spend time asking questions, getting demos, product demos, et cetera. And I'm a fairly regular presenter in SICs.
Yeah, wonderful. So I want to go back to something you mentioned, the IPO. I mean, Salesforce is interesting because it raised something like $65 million in venture capital in total. And that's like a big seed round these days for some companies, or at least it was a year or two ago. And then it went public in 2004. That's pretty fast, given that the .com bust was just a couple of years before that. So I don't know what enabled Salesforce to make that leap that way.
Yeah. So this is all a little fuzzy now, but we started in '99, and I want to say we did 3 rounds of funding in our first year. Like bang, bang, bang. And they were all pretty small, like, I don't know, 4 million, 10 million, 20 million. I don't know. It was something like that. It wasn't a lot of money by today's standards. You're right. You know, there was the concept of the $1 billion unicorn, and that wasn't us. And we went through the .com bust of 2001, which a bunch of the students here are probably too young to remember. But there was a wave of a whole lot of companies being washed out that were selling eyeballs and didn't have a viable product behind it. And we lived through that, and we built a product that was competing with large enterprise software at the time. And one of our abilities to scale was the fact that we were able to build a product at a much lower price point. And one of the stories we would tell people is like, you can go buy your Oracle or your Siebel or your SAP when the economy gets better, but just start with us. And then we ran like hell to make sure that they never left, and it worked out pretty well, and we were able to undermine them. And but the funding round, so we took, by the time of our IPO, I don't remember if we were profitable or not. We were definitely cash flow positive. But we had only raised about $65 million total from the investor community. Our IPO only raised $110 million. And we probably had earned in revenue prior to the IPO maybe another $50 million. So call it $130 million to total before the IPO, and I don't know, call it $200 million before we were fully profitable. And yeah, totally different schedule of the way things happen today.
Okay, so we have lots of students that just came in. I'm glad you guys made it. What advice would you give these guys in thinking about starting their own ventures, especially in a world where, I don't know, there have been tech layoffs and capital's a lot tighter and interest rates and so forth. Like you said, most of them have not experienced these down rounds that the rest of us have lived through. So what kind of guidance or advice would you give them today?
Yeah, I think there's a few things that I'd think about. One is, how much capital do you really need? How much control do you really need to give up? You know, the VC world is terrific, and they've launched a number of incredible ideas. No slight to them, but they didn't invest in Salesforce. We had no VC, which is sort of an interesting thing. And we started in an era when it was much harder to build the infrastructure of a company. You know, we had to set up Microsoft Exchange email servers. We had to set up source code control repositories and development environments. And today you can go sign up with Amazon, you can go sign up with Salesforce, you can go sign up with Google or Microsoft. You know, any of these things, and you can
Get going.
Get a company going, and you can do it in a distributed fashion. You don't even really need real estate, as we've proven over the last few years. Though I do think coming together and working in person does have some really major benefits, and I hope people do start working together more in person. But the idea that you can start a company with a great idea and a small amount of capital, I think, is there, and I think it's something that people should fall back on, as opposed to trying to raise and grow your valuation, and then worry about potentially tripping up at some point and having to go through a down round or something like that. The other thing I'd say is, you're going to work a lot of hours starting a company, so find people you really like to work with, that you really trust, that you're energized to be around, because you're going to spend an awful lot of time with them. And
yeah, you want to find the people that you want to hang out with for 25 years.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
yes.
So, and it also strikes me that, you know, at the time, places like Oracle or SAP, they seemed unassailable. And so there's something about, you've got a good idea and you know it's the right long-term strategy, and just sticking with it, you'll win out.
There is definitely something to that. And that's really comes down to having great leadership.
Yep.
And you know, Mark Benioff has been amazing in that regard. I also think there's a little bit of an element of luck. There's a little bit of element of timing. So, you know, we sometimes joke that if we started Salesforce 6 months earlier than we did, we probably would have fallen into the dot-com trap of all the dot-coms that went public way too early and then weren't able to sustain themselves through the dot-com crash. If we started 6 months later than we did, capital might not have been there to raise. So, you know, I think there's some luck in timing, having a great product, having a great team, having a great vision for the future. You know, you also asked in the question earlier about why do I stay, and you also mentioned software as a service. Well, Salesforce is really unique in the fact that not only did we come up with a new product, but we, in some ways, invented an industry. Yeah. And a lot of people have opportunities to start companies, and that can be an amazing thing. And some people build companies that are amazing features for other worlds, and we've grown by acquiring some of those also. But there aren't many opportunities to start a company that's as impactful and start an industry. Yeah. And, you know, so where would I go? Yeah. I don't, you know, it's...
Well, what is next for you?
I don't know. It's it's a difficult thing for me to answer right now. I love what I'm doing, but you know, one daughter just graduated from college last spring, and she's settled in her first job. My son is a junior at Cornell. My wife and I, you know, priorities may be changing towards traveling more, doing other things, living in other communities, cultures. We've lived in the Bay Area. Well, my wife's from Los Angeles, but I've lived in the Bay Area since effectively 93, I guess. Yeah. we've always said it'd be really interesting to live in New York City for a year or two, live in Europe for a year or two.
I keep trying to convince him to come here and work, with our students here. So, you guys can work on it for me.
Might be an option. You never know.
Good. All right. Well, Jim, thank you so much. This has been delightful. Really appreciate it. And welcome back.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you.
I have a great question for Jim. Jim, I actually figured out what you should do next. It's selling your strategic planning process. I mean, it sounds like it's very proprietary. I mean, it's half of it's.
I could do another whole 45 minutes
Yeah.
on it, and I actually speak about it quite a bit in our Salesforce Innovation Center for our customers, and we have a number of customers that have adopted it.
Yeah.
We've joked about writing a book purely for it, and I don't know, maybe that joke will become reality at some point.
I mean, it could be an incredible consulting business. Not that you really need that, but.
Yeah, Mark Benioff's written a few books, and one of them is a book called Behind the Cloud, and it's my favorite of the 4 books he's written. And in it, he has basically outlined all the plays that we use to build Salesforce.
Yep.
And I forget what number it is, play number 106 or something like that, is the strategic planning process that we use, which we call V2MOM, Vision, Values, Methods, Obstacles, Measures. So.
It's fantastic. Yeah.
Jim, thank you for being here today. You mentioned the COA Club, and that actually caught my attention, especially in Silicon Valley, as you sort of go from a startup to a public company and continue to grow. How do you attract and retain the talent that it takes to grow a company like Salesforce to, what it is for the long haul? That's obviously a challenge for firms, right? As you, some of the upside, let's say with equity positions, et cetera, it's not the same as when you were a startup or a smaller firm. How do you continue to succeed in attracting and retaining the talent?
Yeah, so that's a great question. The attracting and retaining is interesting. And the best way to leverage it is the people that are in your company bringing in people that they've worked with in the past. Because those are the people they trust. Those are the people that they've worked with and understand how they work. And it's a really great way to bring talent in without real heavy recruiting. But you can dangle lots of benefits and candy and entitlements and things like that in front of employees, but really it's creating an environment where they feel like they're contributing and where they are working with other great people and they understand that their work is tied to the vision of the company. If you can do those 3 things, you're going to do a lot for retaining the people that you already have. There are people that are better in startups. There are people that are better in middle-sized companies. There are people that are better in large-sized companies. And you will see a little bit of an ebb and flow. We also have a program inside Salesforce that we call Boomerangs, where we try to bring people back to the company that know our DNA, that worked at Salesforce, that maybe they left for a great role at another company, at another startup, but they've gone and they've learned some new skills and infused themselves with some new DNA that maybe they can bring back into Salesforce so that we can continue to look at everything with a beginner's mind and get outside perspective, but from somebody that also has some DNA inside of Salesforce. So it's a continuous process and journey to always be hiring. In the formative years of Salesforce, I'd say every manager probably spent 20% of their time working on recruiting, and recruiters can do great things for you, but as a leader, you have to go find those people yourself too. And then if you did come from another company, one of the things that we would quietly measure you on is whether you were an attractor of talent from that company. Because if you weren't, why weren't you? So.
Interesting.
Okay, we have time for one more question in the back.
Hi, Jim. I'm Swarnima. I'm part of the MBA class here. So actually, I want to say that I was working at Salesforce before coming to my MBA back in India. So one question, or rather one comment for everyone. So Salesforce is really good at maintaining their culture. The company has been scaling at a crazy pace, and especially when I was in India, the company has scaled in the last 5 years really exceptionally. One thing that has always puzzled me is that even despite all the acquisitions and mergers that take place, the company culture stays intact. What's the magic sauce? How is that happening?
So keeping your culture intact is really challenging, and it's not just through acquisitions, but I think it comes down to your corporate values. And what Salesforce will tell you is that values create value. And we have 5 corporate values: trust, customer success, innovation, equality, and sustainability. And we measure everything by those 5 values. And when we are acquiring another company, if their values are not aligned with our values, we know it's not going to be a good fit, and we'll keep looking in that space, or we'll organically develop something in that space. When we're interviewing for people, we're looking for people that represent those same 5 core values. So those are the steel thread that run through all of Salesforce, and it's super critical when you're doing an M&A. And I won't say we've always gotten it right, but the M&A that we've done where the values have not necessarily been aligned, or the motivation for a company being acquired hasn't been aligned with extending Customer 360, which is our product platform, or growing the industry of software as a service with Salesforce, can be problematic. So we definitely look for that. So I'd say go back to your values.
That's great.
Super. Jim, thank you so much. That was fabulous.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.